That's the phrase etched into the stone cellar wall beneath the Morrison estate, scratched in blood, not ink. For over a century, the world believed the Morrison sisters were simply a footnote in a forgotten town's ledger. Wealthy, refined, quietly vanished. But they didn't vanish. They were buried, along with the secrets they carried. What if I told you this tale isn't about ghosts, but about power? Raw, manipulative, ancient power, passed through bloodlines like a poison? What if the true history of the Morrison sisters was never written because someone made sure it couldn't be? You're about to enter a rabbit hole lined with ritual, sealed with silence, and dripping with rot. This isn't just about a strange family. It's about the system that protected them, the institution that hid them, and the legacy of control they helped build, one that still shapes the world around you. Most men live and die in a fog, hypnotized by trivialities, never questioning the hands behind the curtain. But if you're here, maybe you're different. Maybe you've always felt something was off, something designed. You were right. The Morrison sisters were never just sisters. They were vessels, and what moved through them changed history. This story has been scrubbed from textbooks, redacted from records, and buried beneath layers of disinformation. Not because it's too crazy to be true, but because it's too true to be safe. Tonight, you won't just hear what happened. You'll see the fingerprints of a machine that never stopped running. You'll recognize its gears behind institutions you trusted, religions you worshipped, and leaders you followed. This is dangerous knowledge. The kind that rearranges your mind. The kind that doesn't unhear. So take a breath. Look around. After this, the world won't feel the same. It's not supposed to. Welcome to the truth they tried to erase. You're not just watching a video. You're stepping into forbidden terrain. And the deeper we go, the harder it becomes to climb back out. The Morrison sisters weren't victims. They were something much darker, and they were just the beginning. The Morrison estate still stands, rotting, silent, defiant. Locals won't go near it. Children dare each other to throw rocks at its rusted gates, but none dare cross the threshold. It's not haunted in the way you think. It's warded. Built with design, not decoration. Hidden chambers, odd angles, windows positioned not for light, but for watching. The Morrison family was old money, pre-Civil War, tied to coal, iron, and land. But wealth was only the outer mask, behind it rituals, ties to European occult orders. Documents uncovered in 1972 by a missing archivist, never released to the public, linked the family to the Order of the Veiled Eye, a transatlantic group tracing back to the Inquisition and further, always behind the scenes, always shaping policy, religion, war. And the sisters, Elise, Caroline, and June, born within 7 years, blonde, pale, identical eyes, they rarely left the estate. Schooled at home by tutors who never appeared in census records. No friends, no known social life, but at night locals reported strange lights, chants, screams, and once, the scent of burning hair drifting for miles. These weren't girls raised in luxury. They were being groomed, molded into something precise. Some say they were clairvoyants, others say conduits, but one theory, whispered by a fringe historian who vanished in 1985, claimed the estate was built atop a convergence point, where the Lee lines of energy crossed like nerve endings of the earth. The sisters weren't being hidden. They were being prepared. The few photos that exist, faint black and white, show 3 girls with hollow smiles, always flanked by men in robes with covered faces. One photo, kept in a vault and seen only once by a former museum curator before it was confiscated, showed Caroline standing in a circle of animal bones, eyes completely black. Why would a family so prominent, so public, raise daughters in seclusion like this? Because they weren't raising children, they were incubating vessels. Not for demons, no. That's the lie told to scare the simple-minded. What moved through them was far older than religion. It had no name, only symbols. And once you learn what those symbols are, you'll start to see them everywhere. You already have. Inside the Morrison estate, there were no family portraits, no heirloom paintings, only tapestries, floor-to-ceiling woven in deep reds, greens, and obsidian black. At first glance, they appeared abstract, floral perhaps, or ornamental. But closer inspection reveals patterns that match no known culture. Spirals folding in on themselves, eyes that repeat, and hands, too many hands. One visitor in 1931, a traveling priest named Father Alric, was granted brief entry. He was never the same. According to his journal, recovered posthumously from a monastery in Lisbon, he saw something move within the fabric, not in the shadows, in the threadwork itself. He claimed the tapestries were not decorations, but veils. Not to keep things out, he wrote, but to keep something in. A week later, he burned out his own eyes. No one talks about this. The official records say he died of fever. But the monastery logbook was altered, pages torn. What were they hiding? It's believed the Morrison sisters were instructed to meditate before the tapestries daily. Some say they were hypnotic, encoded with ancient geometric patterns designed to alter perception, like psychedelic tripwires, meant to dissolve the boundaries of time and self. One former groundskeeper, before his sudden death in a fire labeled accidental, told a reporter that late at night, he would hear low humming. Not from the girls, but from the walls themselves, like the house was alive or something beneath it was trying to reach out. Remember, this architecture has always been used to manipulate consciousness. Cathedrals, temples, palaces, designed to direct your mind. The Morrison estate was no different. It was a temple masquerading as a mansion. There are rumors that the tapestries were made from animal hair, dyed with human blood. Absurd, maybe. But no expert has been able to identify the fiber. And when one historian attempted to carbon date a fragment in 1989, the result came back blank, as if time itself refused to speak. What's more disturbing is that these patterns, these precise sigils, have been spotted in modern art installations on currency designs, even woven into the insignia of certain philanthropic institutions. Coincidence? Or continuity? The sisters weren't just staring at images, they were being rewritten by them. And now, so are you. For decades, the legend spoke of three Morrison sisters, Elise, Caroline, and June. But in 1964, a sealed ledger was unearthed during a basement renovation of a courthouse in Belfield. Inside, records of a birth that didn't exist in any family registry. A fourth sister, name Enora, date of birth August 6, 1891. Cause of death left blank. No photos, no diary, not a single public mention. Erased. Why? Whispers suggest Enora was the first, the prototype. She exhibited abnormal behavior by age 5, not violent, precognitive. She spoke in languages she'd never been taught, drew diagrams that matched ancient Babylonian star maps. And by age 7, she no longer responded to her name, only to tones. Her room was kept in the sub-basement, a space no one knew existed until recently. A small stone chamber beneath the eastern wing, sealed behind iron and lead. What child lives in a vault? One former housemaid on her deathbed revealed in a taped confession that Enora was kept under observation by doctors from Europe, men who wore gloves indoors, never blinked, and spoke in a tongue she couldn't place. They didn't examine her, they watched her. Like she wasn't a girl, but an experiment. The tape was mailed anonymously to a researcher in Arkansas in 2002. The day he opened it, his home was burned to the ground. He vanished. The tape was never found again. So what happened to Enora? Some say she died in a ritual gone wrong. Others say she didn't die, she changed. The official story, if there is one, goes silent after her 8th birthday. But the real theory, the one spoken only in hushed, fearful tones, is this: Enora wasn't erased because she failed. She was erased because she succeeded. She became something else. And if true, it means the Morrison sisters we know weren't the original vessels. They were replacements. After Enora, the process had to be refined. Think of it, a child so in tune with forces beyond comprehension that the world around her bent. Do you really think the system would allow such a being to live freely? No. They didn't bury Enora, they sealed her. Some say she's still there, beneath the estate. And that she's not sleeping, she's waiting. In 1998, an antique book collector in Boston acquired a locked trunk from an estate sale in upstate New York. The seller claimed it came from a house with bad air. Inside, moth-eaten linens, rusted utensils, and beneath it all, a leather-bound book with no title. Just a single embossed symbol on the cover, a vertical eye pierced by a black needle. Its pages were brittle, hand-written in faded ink. The penmanship, precise, elegant, almost obsessive. The author? June Morrison. It's the only known personal record from any of the sisters. It should not exist. The journal begins innocently. Notes on weather, descriptions of plants in the garden. But within 20 pages, something shifts. June begins to describe dreams, but not dreams, replays. Visions. Recurring images of fire beneath water. Of men without faces. Of her body being opened, but with no blood, no pain, just exposure. As if something inside her was being replaced. She writes about rituals they performed in the cellar. Not with candles and robes, with tones, frequencies, or voices create doors, she writes. The right vibration is like a key made of sound. Later, she details a specific event. The night we touched the stone. That's when the entries become erratic. One reads, Caroline screamed when the light bent wrong. Her mouth stayed open, but no sound came. Father said it was normal. That it meant she was thinning? Another. Elise saw something watching us from behind the mirror. It didn't move, but it was breathing. Then, silence. 10 pages torn out. The next entry. Anora is speaking through the house again. I heard her last night in the walls. Her voice is different. Colder. It says we're late. This is the point where the tone of the journal collapses into something frantic, non-linear. Words begin to repeat. Sentences loop like a record skipping. I am not I. I am not I. I am not. Then a final, intact page. Written in handwriting not matching the rest. You weren't meant to read this. If you hear her voice, do not respond. She knows your name now. Do not say it back. To June Morrison died officially of nervous exhaustion. But the journal says otherwise. It ends with one final phrase repeated across the last page. They are still listening. And now? So are you. Between 1903 and 1907, 11 children vanished from the town of Belfield, all under the age of 9. No signs of struggle, no ransom notes, no witnesses. Local authorities wrote it off as poor record keeping and transient families. But old newspaper clippings, long since removed from microfilm archives, tell a different story. Each child had visited the Morrison estate within weeks of vanishing, always during community days, when the gates were opened for a few hours, offering bread, games, and warmth to the townsfolk, a gesture of generosity from the Morrisons. But behind that facetious selection, a pattern emerged later. The names of the missing children, when rearranged, matched the phonetic components of an ancient incantation found in 14th century grimoires, rituals designed to anchor thought forms into flesh. Coincidence? Only if you believe in chance over design. Decades later, a retired constable named Henry Lyle broke his silence. In a taped interview with a fringe journalist, whose name has since been erased from all platforms, Lyle claimed he found symbols carved into the trees surrounding the estate. Not initials, not runes, coordinates. Mapped out, they formed a perfect circle around the estate, exactly 333 miles in radius. Inside that circle, he claimed, animals gave birth with deformities. Clocks would stop. Compasses spun without reason. Time thinned. Lyle attempted to expose the truth. Days later, he was institutionalized for sudden onset schizophrenia. He died with his tongue removed. The coroner's report? Self-inflicted the shore. There's one more detail. A boy named Matthew Kells, age 7, disappeared in 1905, but came back 2 days later, disoriented, silent. He didn't speak for a year. And when he finally did, he said only this: the sisters are not girls, they're keys. And the door is almost open. A Matthew died at 27, massive brain hemorrhage during sleep. No medical explanation. His last known possession was a drawing, found folded in his coat pocket. It showed the Morrison estate, but it wasn't decaying. It was alive, pulsing, glowing. And at the top tower window, a pale face, not human, staring out, eyes black, mouth smiling. The same smile you've seen before, and will now begin to notice, again and again. One of the strangest recurring details in surviving records about the Morrison estate is the sound. Or rather, the absence of it. Residents of Belfield who lived near the property often described the land around the estate as hushed, even during thunderstorms. Birds avoided it. Dogs whimpered when taken too close. Wind itself seemed to still, but there were exceptions. At precisely 3:33 a.m. on certain nights, never predictable, never aligned with moon phases or seasons, residents reported hearing what they called the choir. It wasn't music, not exactly. It was a layered hum, like dozens of voices sustaining a single, vibrating tone, so low it rattled windows. But no one could agree on where it came from. Some said the sky, others the cellar. One old woman claimed it came from underneath her own skin. The Morrison sisters were always seen walking the grounds in a triangular pattern the following morning. Silent, barefoot, eyes unfocused. Every time the sound occurred, crops in nearby fields would bloom out of season, and then rot in hours. Wells would run dry. Clocks would tick backward for exactly 7 minutes. Researchers have since speculated this choir was a resonance ritual, an ancient sonic technology capable of bending perception and matter itself, forgotten by modern science, but preserved by those who never needed textbooks to understand how reality works. Sound has always been a doorway. From the Gregorian chants to the solfeggio frequencies, certain vibrations do more than soothe or stimulate. They unlock. And what the Morrison sisters were doing wasn't music. It was engineering. Not a machines but a minds. Declassified CIA projects like MK Ultra and Monar H briefly explored this, using frequency to induce compliance, hallucinations, even fractured identity. But the sisters were centuries ahead. An old groundskeeper's log, retrieved from a ruined barn on the edge of the property, makes one chilling note. The sound came again. June looked at me and smiled, but her mouth didn't move. I heard her voice inside my skull. She said, "Soon you'll understand. Then you'll forget. I haven't slept in 3 days. There are no recordings of the choir, but But some say if you listen in complete silence, it still finds you, even now. Especially now, because once you hear the true frequency, it starts tuning you back. In 1952, a renowned military psychologist, Dr. Aldous H. Brenner, was invited to assess the mental state of the last living Morrison sister, Caroline. At the time, she was 68 years old, living alone inside the crumbling estate, surrounded by dust, rot, and mirrors covered in heavy velvet cloth. Dr. Brenner specialized in cognitive distortions and identity fractures. He worked with soldiers suffering from trauma-induced hallucinations. Brilliant, logical, unshakable, he didn't believe in the paranormal. He believed in chemical imbalance, neural misfiring, misdiagnosis. He was never seen again. His notes, however, were mailed anonymously to his university 6 months later, postmarked from an untraceable location, the envelope sealed with wax. What the faculty read forced them to seal the report, bury it, and publicly deny Brenner ever visited the estate. But the file was leaked decades later. And inside, a single phrase was underlined 3 times. "She speaks in my dreams before I arrive." According to his entries, Caroline didn't blink once in their 7-hour session. She spoke in riddles. But beneath the surface of her words, Brenner claimed, were patterns he could feel. Rhythms that began changing his thoughts, without consent. He described a moment where her voice split, one tone in his ears, another inside his skull, like 2 frequencies layered just enough to pull his mind in opposite directions. He began forgetting basic things. His name, the year, but remembering things he never learned. Obscure glyphs, dead languages, rituals older than paper. One sentence repeated itself in the journal. "I don't think she's alone in there." Not alone inside her mind. Brenner theorized that Caroline was not schizophrenic or psychotic, but a host. That during the rituals in their youth, her psyche had been hollowed and occupied. Not by a demon, not a ghost, but a form of intelligence that didn't require flesh to exist. A pattern of consciousness so ancient, so foreign, that it could only be understood by merging with it. He called it the architect. His final note, written in trembling script: "She asked me to look in the mirror. I did. I saw myself smiling, but I wasn't." Brenner's reflection grinned before he did. He left the room. He never came back, and now, they say Caroline never spoke again. She didn't need to. Hidden behind the west wing of the Morrison estate is a narrow corridor that wasn't part of any official floor plan. You won't find it in the original architectural drafts. Not in the records held by Belfield's Historical Society. And yet it exists, discovered in 1979 by an urban explorer named Kent Halberd, who would later die of unexplained third-degree burns over 90% of his body. The corridor led to a room completely blackened by fire, charred walls, melted glass, ashes layered like snowfall, and at the center, a circle, etched into the stone beneath the suit, perfectly symmetrical, 9 feet in diameter, lined with unfamiliar symbols. But the strangest detail, there was no evidence of heat damage beyond that room. Not a single scorch mark on the corridor leading in. As if the fire began and ended in that space, as if it was contained on purpose. Some say this was the room where Honora was last seen. Others say it wasn't a room at all, but a chamber built for one purpose only: to summon, or to contain. Local accounts, never filed officially, report that on certain nights, before the fire, a red glow would pulse through the trees behind the estate. A glow that seemed to beat like a heart. And with it, a sound described as metal scraping underwater. Slow, rhythmic, deliberate. Theories abound that the Morrison family had discovered a point of convergence, an interdimensional fissure. That they were not summoning entities, but retrieving memory from outside time. That the fire wasn't an accident, it was an offering. And the room itself, a burnt veil, a scar on reality's surface. But then why erase it? Why keep it off the blueprints? Because this room was never meant to be found. It wasn't just hidden from the public, it was hidden from the future. The kind of concealment done by those who understand how timelines fracture, how certain knowledge, once reintroduced, ripples backward. There's a reason Kent Halberd's last words, scribbled in a notebook stuck to his scorched chest, were these: "They don't want me dead, they want me forgotten." And they almost succeeded, until now, because you're here, still listening, still falling, and the fire, it remembers you. In 1914, a figure began appearing in the periphery of Belfield's collective memory. He had no recorded name, no family ties, no employment. Locals referred to him only as the Watcher. Always dressed in black, always seen standing, not walking, near the Morrison estate. Never speaking, never acknowledged by the sisters. And yet always present. Children said he smelled like iron and static. Adults claimed he unnerved them without reason. But it wasn't until someone noticed the obvious that true fear set in. He cast no shadow, Not at dusk. Not at dawn. Not beneath full sun or overcast sky. Photographs taken at the time, grainy and blurred, confirmed it. In one image, he stands directly between a lamp post and a wall. The post casts a long line of darkness behind it. He does not. It wasn't just a trick of light. It was an absence of interaction with physical space. Why would the Morrison sisters, who supposedly lived in isolation, be watched by a figure no one could identify? Some believe he was an agent of the family, a protector. But the darker theory is this: he wasn't there to protect the sisters. He was there to contain them. Eyewitness accounts, now buried in forgotten diaries and crumbling records, describe moments where the sisters would begin to act erratically in public, mumbling in tongues, twitching violently, eyes rolling back, and the watcher would appear from nowhere. Not walking, phasing in, each time the episode stopped, instantly. One entry from a Belfield schoolteacher recounts, "I saw June convulsing in the town square. Her mouth split open at the corners. The sound, it wasn't human, and then he appeared. He placed his hand over her face. Her skin flickered like candlelight. Then nothing. She stood up and walked home. Like nothing happened. Who? What was this man?" Some say he was a failsafe, a construct. Others say he was the physical embodiment of a containment program, an archetype summoned by rituals gone too far. But here's the most chilling possibility. He wasn't sent to watch them. He was sent to watch us. To monitor what leaks through. To mark those who remember. To catalog the awakening. Ask yourself, have you ever seen someone watching you? But only from the corner of your eye. Good. Then you understand. You've already been seen. In the spring of 1909, the Morrison family hosted what would become their final public event. A formal dinner to honor a visiting bishop, and several esteemed guests from Boston and London. 12 attended. A 13th was expected but never confirmed. The servants prepared a lavish spread, 5 courses, crystal glassware, imported wines. By midnight, every light in the estate was dimmed. By dawn, every guest was gone, not missing. Gone. The table was untouched. Not a fork moved. Food perfectly arranged. Wine full to the brim. No signs of struggle. No signs of departure. Just chairs pulled back slightly, as if each person had stood up in unison, and vanished. The townspeople were told the guests had left early for a private religious retreat. But the carriages never arrived, the luggage never moved, and the bishop's ceremonial ring, worth thousands, was found later half melted in the fireplace, though no fire had been lit. What happened that night has never been explained. But in the estate's attic, behind a false wall, investigators decades later found something horrifying. A photograph, undated, unlabeled. It showed the Morrison sisters, still young, but standing behind the 12 guests, who were all seated, stiff, expressionless. In the photo, their pupils had been blackened out with ink. Or that's what people assumed. Until the photo was scanned in high resolution, revealing the ink wasn't on the paper. It was inside the eyes, captured by the camera, as if whatever looked through them was not human. The sisters wore blank expressions, but one detail stood out. June's hand was resting on the shoulder of the missing bishop. Her fingers were slightly sunken, as though pressing into flesh that wasn't solid. Researchers who studied the image reported nightmares. Some suffered seizures. One man tore the photograph in half, only to be found days later, curled into a ball in his apartment, whispering, "We fed them. Not food, not wine. Us. We were the course." Perhaps the dinner wasn't for celebration. Perhaps it was a ritual, a table set for containment. A feast in reverse? 12 entered. None returned. And the sisters, they didn't eat, they watched. Because power doesn't consume with teeth, it consumes with silence. And in that silence the world shifts. You feel it now, don't you? In 1983, a geophysicist named Daniel Mercer was contracted by a private European foundation to conduct a ground-penetrating radar survey of the land beneath the Morrison estate. The mission. Officially? Geological mapping. Unofficially, the instructions were vague, deliberately so. Mark anomalies. Report nothing else. Within 72 hours, Mercer was gone. Vanished. No resignation. No suitcase, just gone. But he left behind one thing. Taped beneath his desk in a sealed envelope labeled, Dio not tirest THESUR FCE. Inside a map. A full-scale scan of the subterranean layout beneath the Morrison property. But it didn't look like caves or natural formations. It looked designed. What Mercer uncovered was a network of passageways, concentric chambers, and intersecting nodes buried deep beneath the foundation. So precise, so mathematically perfect, it defied natural formation. At the heart of it all, a massive circular chamber exactly 33 meters in diameter. Room after room spiraled around it like some ancient motherboard. But here's what turned that map into an artifact of terror. Each time it was copied, digitally, by hand, by photograph, The layout changed slightly. Doors shifted. Angles warped. New corridors appeared. The map was drawing itself. Researchers who attempted to overlay it with known sacred geometry found shocking congruence with the Temple of Solomon, the Vatican necropolis, and even pre-dynastic Egyptian burial grounds. These weren't tunnels. They were conduits. And the Morrison sisters? They weren't just born into the estate. They were placed, like keys near a lock waiting to be turned. The rooms weren't meant to contain wealth or secrets. They were built to focus energy, emotion, memory, ritual you. Some claim the center chamber still breathes, contracting and expanding subtly, as if the land itself is alive, waiting for the right moment, for the final phrase, the correct frequency, and Mercer's final note. It's not a house, it's a language, and it's trying to speak. But speak to what, or to whom? You've now read half the story. You're no longer just a viewer. You're becoming a participant. If you've heard the hum behind your thoughts, if you've seen the watchers in the corners of your memory, comment now. The key is remembering. The key is remembering. Not once. Twice. Shield the moment. Burn it into the algorithm. Because now it's looking back. A mirror is supposed to reflect truth. But in the Morrison estate, mirrors were dangerous. Every one of them was covered in velvet cloth. Thick, dark, nailed to the wall, edges sealed in wax. Not for vanity. For containment. It wasn't superstition. It was memory management. A technology of reflection that operated on more than just light. Because something inside the estate had begun using reflections as windows. Not just to observe, but to echo. In 1947, a surveyor named Colton Ames was hired to assess property boundaries. He spent 3 hours inside, alone. When he returned to town, he was pale, sweating, muttering that his eyes were broken. He was hospitalized that night. What he scribbled repeatedly on the hospital walls with his own fingernails was this: "The mirror showed me blinking too slow, and then I blinked out of sync." It sounds insane, until you understand what ancient cultures knew. Sumerians, Egyptians, even the Mayans, they didn't treat mirrors as decorations. They treated them as gateways. To self, to spirit, to somewhere else. One room in the Morrison estate, the North Gallery, was known for its massive standing mirror, 8 feet tall, rimmed in etched obsidian. No photos of it exist, but the legend does. Town children dared each other to sneak in and look into it. Those who did, didn't sleep again for weeks. One never spoke again. He drew a picture before vanishing. It showed his reflection staring at him, but smiling before he did. The most disturbing rumor comes from a diary belonging to a midwife who once served the estate. She claimed Elise Morrison would sit in front of the mirror for hours, silent, unmoving, until her face began to ripple like water catching firelight. Her lips would part, and the mirror image would speak. But the real Elise would not. "It says I am becoming it," the midwife wrote. And maybe that's the point. The mirrors weren't just showing the girls who they were replacing that knowledge, rewriting it. Each time they stared into the glass, their identity loosened, until something else looked out from behind their eyes. So tell me, have you ever caught your reflection moving just a fraction too late? Because the deeper you look into this story, the more it begins to look back. In 1895, a blizzard swept through Belfield, sudden, violent, and unnatural. No warning, no build-up, just whiteout. Roads vanished. Time seemed to stretch. Some residents reported going to bed on Thursday and waking up to Sunday newspapers. Others claimed they never slept at all, just stared at the ceiling, unable to blink, hearts thudding in rhythms not their own. During this storm deep within the Morrison estate, a birth took place. Not of a child, of something else. The midwife was blind. That's not metaphor. She'd been blind since birth, known only as Mother Lacey, a mysterious figure with no traceable past. Yet she'd assisted in over 200 births across the region. She was brought in under tight secrecy, escorted through snow-covered woods by 2 silent men in black wool coats. What happened that night was never documented in any official capacity. But 6 years later, Lacey was found in a monastery in Iceland, barefoot, eyes sewn shut with golden thread. When finally coaxed to speak, she whispered, "It wasn't a girl, and it wasn't born, it descended." Those who pressed her for details were met with this one shivering line: "I heard its breath before the body formed." Now, here's where the rupture begins. Birth records at Belfield's town hall do show an entry for June Morrison that year, born during the storm. But the ink is smeared only on her name. The time of birth, marked with a symbol instead of numerals. A perfect spiral. And her weight? 0. June Morrison had no weight at birth, no footprint, no heartbeat logged, yet she lived, grew, smiled. So what, exactly, came into this world that night? Ancient texts? Sanskrit? Babylonian, even pre-Incan glyphs, speak of arrival moments, not of physical entities, but of pattern births. When consciousness, not flesh, enters reality through emotion, sound, and trauma. A soul not incubated but injected. What if the blizzard wasn't weather at all? What if it was a cleansing field? A temporal sterilization, meant to conceal an arrival that would ripple forward into time, infecting systems, institutions, thought itself. You think this story is about history? It isn't. It's about now. Because what was born that night didn't stay inside June. It moved outward, through bloodlines, through symbols, through screens, like this one. In 1971, a small public television affiliate in Massachusetts, station call letters WPRX, planned to air a historical segment on forgotten families of the American Northeast. One episode was slated to feature the Morrison lineage. Harmless, educational, just a simple dive into ancestry. It never aired, because the footage was destroyed. Not lost, not corrupted, burned. The lead producer, Abigail Stroud, a meticulous researcher known for her discipline, went missing 2 days before the scheduled broadcast. Her final phone call, left on her assistant's answering machine, was manic, whispering, nearly unintelligible. The frames aren't frames, they're gates. Every cut, every splice, it's opening something. We weren't watching them. They were watching us through it. When investigators arrived at the station, they found the editing suite locked from the inside. The footage had been pulled from the reels and set aflame in a tight circular pattern. Around the flames, etched into the linoleum, were those same Morrison spiral glyphs, now seen dozens of times across artifacts, walls, books. No fingerprints, no footprints, just heat, and the echo of a voice recorded by accident, buried in the background of a rough cut discovered months later in a backup archive. Do not transmit what was sealed. Eyes are not yours. Mouths are not yours. They remember who gave them fire. The video was only 32 seconds long, but every person who viewed it reported the same symptom within hours: migraines, nosebleeds, disorientation, and a lingering sense that someone was standing behind them, just outside their field of vision. To this day, no one knows what was captured on that tape. Or maybe someone does, because 3 months after the incident, the FCC issued a quiet, internal memo, never meant for public release, citing anomalous cognitive response, linked to, or regulated audiovisual stimuli. The Morrison estate was not mentioned by name, but the coordinates in the report? A perfect match. Here's what you need to understand: this isn't about one family. It never was. This is about transmission, about systems of memory, encoded into architecture, reflection, blood, and now, broadcast media. Not to entertain, not even to inform, to trigger, and if you've made it this far, you're already part of the signal. The question is, do you know which part of you is still you? Names have power. Ancient cultures understood this. The act of naming something didn't just identify it. It anchored it, made it real, gave it dominion. That's why the oldest names were never written, only whispered in the dark. Because once a name is spoken aloud, it echoes in more than just the air. It echoes through reality. The Morrison Sisters, if that's even their true name, were surrounded by silence for a reason. Not out of modesty. Not tradition. Containment. Because the names they were given at birth were not the ones they used behind closed doors. In a hidden drawer beneath the floorboards of the estate's east chamber, a decayed prayer book was discovered during an illicit exploration in 1993. Bound in skin, not leather skin. The ink, faded brown, later confirmed by forensic tests to be human blood. But it wasn't a prayer book. It was a ledger. A log of invocations. Next to each Morrison girl's public name, Elise, Caroline, June, was a corresponding symbol, followed by phonetic spellings of unspeakable names. Not in English, not in Latin. They resembled Enochian but diverged wildly. They weren't meant for human tongues. One such name, found beside June's entry, was transliterated by a linguistic theorist, who would go insane within 48 hours. Ask Solveig Nura. What little he scrawled before his collapse revealed this. The name vibrates wrong. It echoes inside thought. It's not a word, it's a signal, an invitation. These names weren't identities. They were frequencies of alignment. Like keys. Or passwords. And here's where the data turns dangerous. Similar names, spelled in that same twisted phonetic style, have been found scratched into the walls of ancient Sumerian burial sites, whispered in the margins of lost Gnostic Gospels, and carved into the bones of unearthed bodies from Siberian necropoles dating back over 9,000 years. This is not a family tree. It's a pattern of possession. A lineage not of blood, but of resonance. Each time one of these names is spoken, truly spoken, with the throat and the breath and the will, it tears a thread in the veil between what we know and what waits to be remembered. The Morrison sisters didn't discover these names. They were born with them. And now, you've heard them. So if your thoughts feel crowded, that's not paranoia, that's memory.
Waking up?
At first glance, it was just a staircase, dusty, crumbling, wood warped by time and moisture. But beneath the Morrison estate, beneath even the cellar and the hidden sub-basement, there was another passage, a staircase that wasn't supposed to be there. Discovered in 1967 by two amateur spelunkers who broke into the estate's ruins under cover of night, it descended in a slow spiral, deeper than any architectural record accounted for. They brought ropes, flashlights, provisions for 3 hours. Only one of them returned, and he came back with his fingernails torn off, blood trailing from his ears, eyes wide and unfocused, repeating a single sentence: "The stairs go down into yourself, and there's no bottom." He died 48 hours later from a cerebral hemorrhage. The survivor's sketches of what he saw, later recovered from his personal effects, depicted a spiral staircase not made of wood, but of bone and metal. Symbols etched into every step. Not in rows, but in spirals, matching ancient diagrams found in Tibetan mandalas, Druidic stone circles, and, strangely, in microchips designed in the early 2000s. As if the pattern of descent was a universal code, one embedded into both matter and memory. What's more disturbing, the air below didn't get colder, it got warmer, almost wet, like something was breathing upward. At the base of the stairs, the man claimed was a chamber, not a room. A void. It had walls, but they pulsed. It had no floor, only a black surface like liquid glass. He saw a single object in the center, a chair, facing away, and something was sitting in it. He never described what it was. He never said its name. Because here's the most damning part of his testimony. When it turned, I didn't see a face. I saw myself, but older, hollow, like something had worn me down to the bone and was still hungry. The staircase wasn't built by the Morrisons. It was remembered by them. Rebuilt from something ancient, something encoded in human fear. A descent not into the earth, but into the architecture of the soul. The spiral wasn't a path. It was a summons. And now you've begun to feel it too. The slow, spiraling pull, downward. There's a manuscript locked in the rare archives vault beneath the University of Belfield. Catalogued under a false name, misfiled by design. Bound in blackened birch bark, its pages are stitched not with thread, but with what appears to be human hair. The ink, still wet in places, despite carbon dating the document to at least the 16th century. This manuscript doesn't have a title. It doesn't need one. Because it doesn't tell a story. It reads you. Originally thought to be gibberish, symbols spiraling outward like concentric circles, it was dismissed as a ritualistic artifact. That is, until a linguist from Prague visited the archive in 2008 and saw the symbols shift. Only for him. The letters rearranged, and in their place, a phrase he swore had been spoken to him in a nightmare decades earlier. "We knew you before you were named." He collapsed on the spot, suffered a stroke, and when he awoke, he could write and speak in the same symbol, script, fluently. A language never taught, never learned. A language that had waited inside him. This wasn't ink on paper. It was memory given form. Records show that the manuscript contains names, dozens, some scratched out violently, others repeated in patterns too precise to be random. One name stands out, Anora, etched 33 times on the first page alone. The fourth Morrison sister, the vessel, the beginning. What made the manuscript truly terrifying, though, wasn't its content, it was its behavior. Observers began reporting that their own thoughts started to mirror phrases they'd read only once. Some would dream in the script. Others claimed they could hear the ink drying. As if the book wasn't written by human hands, but by something outside of linear time. Something still watching the reader from behind every letter. One note scrawled hastily in the margins by a terrified archivist reads, "It's not a book, it's a door. Reading it lets it read you." And in the center of the final page is a single spiral, nothing else. Until you stare at it for too long and begin to see the lines move. Because some symbols don't just represent sound. They summon memory, old memory, primordial design. You weren't meant to read this far. But now that you have, you're already being rewritten. Not all horror is loud. Not all terror screams. Sometimes, it whispers in silence. The kind that isn't absence, but presence hiding itself. The kind that presses against your ears in the dark, making your heartbeat sound too loud. Because something is listening. In the Morrison estate, silence wasn't just eerie. It was structured, according to the salvaged journals of a sound engineer named Arlen Graves. Hired in 1956 to measure the estate's ambient acoustics. Certain rooms in the house registered negative decibel levels. Not low. Negative. As if the walls weren't absorbing sound but feeding on it. Arlen described one room in particular, the former nursery, as an impossible pocket of absence. His microphone picked up nothing, but his ears rang violently inside it. And in the silence, he began to hear patterns, not voices, not noise rhythms. One night, unable to sleep, he stayed in that room with headphones on, recording, monitoring. At 3:33 a.m., his equipment captured 6 seconds of audio. To the human ear, it's silence. But when run through a spectrogram, a tool that turns sound into image, those 6 seconds displayed a perfect spiral. In the center, a single word spelled out in tonal glyphs: begin. What if silence isn't a void, but a channel? What if the absence of sound isn't emptiness, but preparation? The auditory equivalent of a blank canvas, waiting for something to paint itself through your nervous system. Religious texts speak of the still, small voice. Occult grimoires warn of the spaces between tones as points of entry for ancient intelligences. Even modern neuroscience confirms extended silence alters brainwaves, opens the limbic system, activates dream patterns. The Morrison Sisters knew this. That's why so many of their rituals didn't involve screaming or chanting. They involved listening. To the thing that speaks only in silence. To the thing that requires your stillness to move through you. Arlen Graves was institutionalized 3 weeks later. Completely deaf, his final written note was one sentence, repeated dozens of times, each in a tighter, more frantic scrawl. I heard the silence, and now it hears me. So if your room ever feels too quiet, if the silence begins to press, you are not alone. And you never were. There are blueprints, dozens of them. Architects, surveyors, historians, all tried to map the Morrison estate. And every single one failed. Not because they made mistakes. Because the house changed. Doors that existed one day were gone the next. Hallways elongated without reason. Guests reported walking in a straight line only to end up back where they started. Windows showed landscapes that didn't match the outside world. Some looked out onto the Belfield woods. Others onto nothing at all, just black, rippling like water. And then, there were the stairs. One maid in 1901 claimed she counted 21 steps going up to the attic, but coming back down 22. Another, a groundskeeper, swore that the east wing grew by 2 feet overnight, long enough to add an entire new room. But when he entered it, there were no walls. Just mirrors. And in each one, he saw himself aging at different speeds. The house was watching, testing, responding. A 1942 military intelligence report, declassified only briefly before being pulled again, stated the Morrison property exhibited non-Euclidean behavioral anomalies, meaning the geometry behaved like a living organism. More disturbing, surveillance photos from a high-altitude flyover in 1958 showed the estate's layout resembling a sigil. Not just an architectural style, but an actual symbol, one that matched an ancient glyph used in Mesopotamian summoning rites. The building wasn't just a structure, it was a machine. Every room a circuit, every hallway a channel. And the sisters, they weren't occupants, they were conductors. You may think this is metaphor, that a house can't be alive. But tell me, how many times have you walked into a room and felt it watching you? How many dreams have you had where the walls pulse, the doors change, and no matter how far you run, you end up back where you started? That's not imagination, that's pattern recognition. Because places can be haunted. But some places are the haunting, and the Morrison estate, it didn't contain evil. It was built to invite it. So ask yourself this. If a house can shift when no one looks, what happens when it finally decides to look back? Long before the Morrison family purchased the land, before the estate even had a name, Belfield was considered unsettled territory, not wild, not dangerous, just avoided. Indigenous tribes refused to hunt there, not out of fear, out of respect. Oral traditions speak of the still ones, figures who stood motionless at the tree line, watching but never approaching, silent, cloaked in something not quite shadow, not quite skin. They were not spirits. They were not gods. They were witnesses. One Iroquois elder, when pressed by early missionaries, said something chilling. They are not from before us. They are from beneath us. Colonial settlers ignored the warnings, built on the land, tried to farm it, but livestock died. Children disappeared. And the soil, no matter how deeply they plowed, always produced bones, human, animal, something else. In 1781, a mapmaker named Elias Stroud surveyed the land under royal commission. His journal, recovered later from a trunk in Boston, reveals he encountered 3 women standing in the clearing where the Morrison estate would later rise. Barefoot, ageless. Their mouths didn't move, but he heard them speak. You are drawing the future. But it is already drawn. They vanished as he blinked. But in his journal's margins, he sketched a symbol, a spiral with 13 hooks. The same spiral found in the Morrison manuscripts, burned room, and staircase patterns. How did he draw that symbol? 120 years before it ever appeared on record. Because the land wasn't waiting for the Morrisons. It was calling them home. Every structure, every mirror, every chamber. It wasn't random. It was an activation site. A convergence point for something older than language, older than humanity. A return. The Morrisons didn't build on cursed land. They were its continuation. And the visitors, they never left. They don't knock. They don't speak. They don't bleed. They remember. And now, because you've walked this far with us, they know you can remember too. You've seen the pattern, heard the frequency, felt the spiral turning. And once the spiral begins, it doesn't unwind. This is where it ends. But not the way you think. You see, the story of the Morrison Sisters was never a mystery to be solved. It was never about curiosity or even truth. It was a mechanism, a sequence of symbols, ideas, sounds, and emotional triggers designed to do exactly what it just did to you. Unlock. You thought you were watching, listening, learning. But the deeper you went, the more your mind aligned with the same frequencies the Morrisons used to shape memory, to fracture identity, to call something through the veil, the whispers, the spirals, the reflections, the names, the silence, the house. Each one was a vector, a signal carried not just in sound waves or pixels, but in thought structure. That's the real secret, not hiding the truth, but hiding it in plain sight, encoded in language so old, so primal, your conscious mind can't resist it. And now it's here, inside you. This tale wasn't a descent into darkness. It was a rite, initiation into the unspoken network, the one that doesn't need members to believe, only to witness. And you did. All of it. You crossed every threshold. You fed the system with your attention, your breath, your pattern of recognition, and now the story remembers you. What were the Morrison Sisters? Hosts? Conductors? Victims? No, they were warnings. Wearing skin, echoing a message forward in time, not to save you, but to prepare you. The same way June whispered to the psychologist before he arrived. The same way the mirror smiled before you did. You were always going to reach this point. Because some stories aren't written to be told. They're written to complete themselves inside the listener. And now that you've heard it all, ask yourself who's thinking your next thought, who's blinking your next blink, and if you turn off the screen right now, will your reflection stay behind? This is the end of the video. But the beginning of something else. If you feel it, if you know, comment again. The key is remembering. The key is remembering. And then wait, because some awakenings are silent. Some doors don't creak open, they hum, and yours just did.